Well, hello, I am Doc Phineas, and thank you for joining me today in my garden where I'm reading from my book that has been on the New York Times bestseller list, From India with Love. And for those of you who follow my books that I write, you know I write under the pen name of Swami Ramananda. And these are adventures that occurred in India during the 1960s and 1970s when I was in India, basically from the University of California, Berkeley, as a young archaeologist, but was also swept into the entire spiritual revolution that was occurring at that time with many, many young people from around the world in India studying with various masters, searching for enlightenment, searching for spirituality, and having a great, great adventure in one of the most fascinating subcontinents in the world. So today I'm going to be reading from my best-selling book and just sharing a little bit with you just in case you would like to come on the journey with me from India with love. So here we go. In the foreword, it is written, "There are single moments of time that contain an entire eternity. Perhaps nothing feels more eternal than the golden sands of the Thar Desert in northern Rajasthan. From atop your camel, you can see that for miles and miles, there is only the golden light from shifting dunes. Hot winds blow across your face, and there is only you, your camel, and the sand. There's something breathtaking in that kind of solitude. An awareness of the self within the self is unavoidable." And that is from my journey across India from the diary of Swami Ramananda. The first year, I pulled back the reins of my camel, turning my head so as not to breathe the slow, hot wind and enigmatic sand. I looked out on an ocean of desert. Great beige dunes were blowing and shifting as far as the eye could see. The sun was like a giant fiery orb, slowly sinking on the horizon. My companions made their snail-paced trek towards the setting sun, surrounded by the endless Thar Desert of remote Rajasthan, India. I am pulling back on the reins, just as the Mahout told me. "But my camel continues off course," cried Krishnavani. She adjusted her scarf over her mouth and face as another desert blast of hot wind and sand swept over us. I looked at her face to make sure that she was in control. I see in her eyes the determination of a true yogini. Despite being only an 18-year-old girl from Boston, she was determined to survive India and savor every moment of the experience. "Krishnavani, you have to pull on the reins hard to the right to get the camel to turn. If you pull very hard straight back, it will stop and sink to its knees," I yelled over the roar of the desert winds. Krishnavani somehow managed to get her huge white camel back on the trail, rather than wandering out of sight in the desert dunes. "Oh, that's much better. I was afraid I was headed for Pakistan." Raju and I both laughed and admired her fearlessness. She was in India as a college student and traveled extensively on her own. It was amazing, her determination, which to me exemplified her character and intentions as a serious student of yoga. As our little caravan continued across the dunes, we grasped in awe as the sunset turned into the desert red golden hues of azure mountains and sky. Everything started to sparkle, as if we were treading on 1,000 rubies. The sun was now huge in the western sky, and it enveloped us like a supernova. In spite of the blowing sand, I adjusted my scarf so that I could watch each second of life glowing from our great star. "How far are we from the Bopa camp?" yelled Raju. We are close, smiled my dear Swami Shankaranandagiri. Swamiji looked so beautiful with his bright orange robes blowing in the sunset breeze. His presence was always so peaceful on our many journeys throughout India. His smile had a way of soothing every concern. He looked at me directly in the eyes as if to say, "Are you awake, my son, in this beautiful moment of life we are sharing?" Hearing his thoughts, I smiled back at him and nodded. Dagar Sharif, our guide, rode nearby and explained that we were only a short distance from the camp. We were certain that we were close because we had already seen several panahanis, village women dressed in bright saris and balancing multiple pots of water on their heads as they walked across the horizon. The slow and steady sway of riding a camel is almost like a sedative. The desert was so vast, and the monotony of the open scenery quickly lured me into a state beyond space and time. Whenever I am in the desert, I find my consciousness drifting like the sand. There was so much bliss that evening that I didn't care how long it was going to take me to reach our encampment. Just to be in that moment of that perfect sunset was enough. It was a golden moment in time that I wished would never end, a moment that I could record in my mind right then and there so that I could return to that spot of consciousness again and again, reliving every ecstatic second. A small Bopa boy approached us, playing his ravanata, an instrument which is sort of a makeshift violin, made from a fat piece of wood with a couple of strings and a bow. The sound was surreal. It provided a perfect accompaniment to the last streaks of sunlight flowing from the edge of the world. The young boy continued to play a fugue from the great oral traditions of the Rajasthani gypsies on his ravanata. As we approached the Bopa gypsy camp, we saw women and children running to our camels. The sudden drab beige of the Thar Desert was now alive with color. The Rajasthani got to this beautiful place only by camel. The sudden drab beige of the Thar Desert was now alive with color. What a worthy journey it was. Seeing along the way the sights, the sounds, and the colors of the Thar Desert. "How are you doing, Ramananda?" Swamiji spoke up warmly as he popped his head into my little tent palace. "Ah, Swamiji, please come into my humble abode," I replied. "Ah, this looks very comfortable." His laughter rolled into the tent, causing havoc to all the tapestries, and suddenly all the tiny mirrors were reflecting a sea of orange robes. "What an amazing adventure, Swamiji. I just experienced seeing the sunset I will never forget as long as I live. The people are so sweet and so colorful. This is like a dream." I was entirely joyful. "Yes, dear one, India is like a dream. The environments here are all designed by God to take one into a higher state of consciousness. I am convinced that India is the soul of the world. Every atmosphere you find seems to awaken the mind. Here we are in a remote desert, but can't you feel the powerful Shakti? The energy of the Divine Mother seems to radiate from the land," Swamiji spoke convincingly. I completely understood. "Swamiji, when I look at the huge setting sun, it was like a doorway to some higher ethereal reality. I can't quite express it, but I had this feeling of eternity, of being completely out of the regular time-space continuum. That is the magic of the desert," replied the old Swami, his eyes twinkling. "And there are doors, and there are doors. India is filled with such vortices. This is the great secret." looked directly into my beloved Swami's eyes, and we shared a moment of pregnant silence. Our peace was invaded by a bejeweled head. All right, you guys, come on, get with it. You can come to the party in your dusty old clothes. Let's put some effort into it. We see that Krishnavani had somehow been transformed into a bellowing princess with a golden nose chain, and she was dripping in costume jewelry, the jewelry of the Bopa women. She was wearing a bright red sari with broad gold borders and shimmering mirrors. If I didn't know better, I would have sworn that she was a Bollywood cinema queen. She wore the Bopa gypsy queen costume with an air of utter authenticity. Swamiji and I collapsed into each other's arms laughing. Ah, the sweet smell of youth, Swamiji exclaimed with Shakespearean gestures. We spent a wonderful evening together, and with the others, we built a crackling campfire with high dancing flames that burned past the desert dusk and touched the stars. We sat about and clapped to the rhythm emanating from the sitara, a double flute, the two-string sarangi and kamaicha, the murla aiken or snake charmer's flute, and the kartal, 4 pieces of wood played together like Spanish castanets. The langars and the manangyars, 2 professional Indian entertainment casts, sang many songs inviting and celebrating the monsoon, songs of lovers' messages, and songs of the ordeals faced by women when they fetched water from a distant pond. As the evening moved along, several young girls from the Kamad tribe started to dance, and they were maybe 15 years old, and were each balancing 7 pots of water called terhali on their heads. Each pot of water was smaller, up to the highest pot, which was very tiny. And they danced this balancing act up on their toes, going up steps of wood stairs, and finally with swords in their mouths. We were all amazed. Then Krishnavani was selected from the crowd to join them, and looking very much like a reluctant desert princess carrying pots of water on her head, she splashed everyone in the audience with each step, and the crowd laughed, but decided that because of the scarcity of water, she had danced enough. In the meantime, the smells coming from the pots hung over the fire were sending me into culinary bliss. I smelled curry mixed with fresh ground tamarind and cumin. 1 pot of golden dal was definitely calling to me. It was astounding to see the desert cuisine created nightly in these caravans, with every cooking pot, utensil, and morsel of food having been carried out into the middle of nowhere by camels. Suddenly, exotic dishes and delectable spices appeared, and enormous plates of food were brought to us, including beautifully prepared dal, chapatis, vegetable curries, and different desert sabjis. With a big mouthful of dal and chapati, Krishnavati somehow managed to blurt out, "These desert folk do well for themselves." She appeared to be eating with both hands, shoveling in the delicious meal. Who could blame her after such a long camel ride? As we ate, some boys from the Nath tribe got our attention by strewing hot coals from the fire into a desert sandpit. And much to our awe, they proceeded to do acrobatic acts and run about on the hot coals. I started to protest, but Swami Shankarananda Giri took my arm gently and smiled that smile that said, "My son, this is their cultural tradition." And to the amazement of all of us, no one gets burned. But what a performance it was. Even those of us sitting far back from the coals could feel the heat emanating from the burning coals onto our faces. And all of those desert boys were barefoot. Afterwards, we took a long walk into the dark night, which was by then illuminated by a myriad of stars. I held hands with Krishnavani and Swamiji. Raju walked on Swamiji's other side. And as we ventured from the fire, there was literally nothing but starlight to guide us. We stumbled through the dunes, but I kept a watchful eye, having seen plenty of deadly desert asps and cobras slithering through the clumps of bushes on our way. One always feels such a guarded abandon in India. You must always stay a bit grounded if you're going to survive the wilds of adventure. However, when we were with Swamiji on that trip, we never really worried. He was armed with enough potent mantras to cure anything. I loved walking along with him in silence. His silence was always so full. Being in the presence of such a saint, I could not help but benefit spiritually, even by his touch. His glance was so full of wisdom that it answered every question without words. To even have uttered a remark under the stars while in the presence of such an exalted being would have been to rob the moment of its potency. On such nights throughout my life, my beloved Guru Sri Anandamayi Ma has come to me in such beautiful forms. I always see her sitting right in the stars, looking lovingly at me and blessing everyone on the earth. At such times as on that amazing night in the Thar Desert with Swamiji, I always think of the words written in the book The Mother by the great spiritual leader and teacher Sri Aurobindo. And yet, it is not easy to meet the demand of this enchanting power or to keep her presence. Harmony and beauty of the mind and soul. Harmony and beauty of the thoughts and feelings. Harmony and beauty in every outward act and movement. Harmony and beauty of the life and surroundings. This is the demand of Mahalakshmi. Swami Shankarananda Giri finally broke our silence by turning to me. You're thinking of Anandamayi Ma, aren't you? Why, yes, Swamiji, I am. In such remote places, Mother still finds us. I can feel her love and protection all around us so strongly on this moonless night. He paused and then continued, she is the all-pervading power of this universe. She told me once that she would be with us in every moment, every second of every day. Somehow tonight, she feels so very strongly with us in this place. Swamiji, Krishnavani, and I all smiled and looked at one another. It was our India. We continued walking arm in arm into that beautiful night, a great land of mystery and peace. We each had the look of shared understanding in our eyes, and we didn't utter another word as we walked and walked, as there were no words to explain the poignancy of that moment. The beauty and harmony of the mother prevailed long into the night. So that is the first chapter of my wonderful new book, From India with Love. I encourage you to read and to come on the journey with me and to enjoy the adventure of a lifetime deep into the wonder and the mystery of the Thar Desert of Rajasthan. So this is Doc Phineas, also known as Swami Ramananda, saying blessings from my garden to yours, and I hope you have enjoyed this time of reading from my new book, From India with Love. Shukriya and Namaste. Namaste.